Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last session of the 18th Cycling and Society Symposium, the second one that has gone fully virtual. And first of all, thanks everyone who is joining. Thanks for joining on the previous sessions. We will have a little bit of stats at the end of how the symposium has gone. But so far, I would like to share with you a little bit of the structure of this session. How is it going to work? So basically, we have very special people invited today to this session. So they'll introduce themselves. There will be also book presentations. So 3 of them, and they will have corresponding discounts in the Deleguide website that we will remind you about how to access that. And then we will move on to the conclusions of the symposium. So several of us will share some of the notes that we've taken, the highlights of the symposium that we've had over these 2 days, these 2 full days. And finally, some closing remarks from the local organizers. So I would like to start then with these roundtable introductions. If you could start presenting yourself and introducing a little bit yourself, and then we will move on to the book. So first of all, we have around here Peter Cox. So Peter, if you can introduce yourself. Also mention, if you're able, the 2 presentations that you submitted, the titles of them, please.
Yes, 2 presentations, basically because I'm utterly disorganized, and I dutifully thought, yes, I will respond to the initial call, and then when the reminder went out at the end, I thought, oh, can't remember doing that, I'll put another one in. But as it is, I put 2 presentations in that reflect the kind of twin tracks I'm working on at the moment. As professor of sociology, I kind of have a duty to do stuff, and I'll talk about the books afterwards, but also involved in the union campaign on the UCU union campaign on decolonize and decarbonize. And I think actually the synchronicity between those and giving that how those agendas impact upon what we do as in cycling research, I think is quite both interesting and a very fruitful one. But I want to, as you'll have seen from the presentation, I've wanted to go beyond decarbonisation towards kind of, well, what are the mechanisms for that? And if we're decolonising the process of growth that actually leads to the high, is responsible for the high carbon, then I think we need to look at the degrowth agenda as a way of decarbonising. So that's been my my starting point and the theme of the presentations. Do you want me to talk about the book?
If you can just mention the title, and then I'll go back to you for you to explain a little more. Yeah,
okay. So the 2 books out in paperback this year, first of which is the Cycling, a Sociology of Better Mobility, and which I already regret the title of. And the second one is the Politics of Cycling Infrastructure, which is co-written with Till Colin, who's been around here. Hello, Till, if you're out there. And so, yes, we'll talk about those later. I'll shut up.
Great, thank you, Peter. And we have Justin Spini around as well. If I remember it well, I think Justin was one of the founders, the core group founders of the Cycling and Society Research Group. University of Cardiff, long-time friend of the research group and symposium. And Justin, if you could introduce yourself briefly and mention the title of your book, and I'll go back to you later.
Thanks, Esther. Yeah, I'm not sure if I think founding might be putting it to people that rocked up interested in cycling research, and it seemed to have sort of legs, as it were. So and I'm very glad that it did. So yeah, I'm Justin Spinney. I'm a senior lecturer at Cardiff University, and yeah, I've been looking into cycling for more years than I care to mention now. But one of the culminations, I guess, of looking at cycling increasingly really from a sort of broader political economic angle is a book that was published, I think, end of 2020, early urban cycling, which tried to bring together what I'd sort of been doing over the last 10 or 15 years, and which I guess I'll talk a little more about once the introductions are done. So yeah.
Awesome, thank you. We also have a third group of book editors. In this case, we have Cosmin, which is also member of our support committee, and together with Dennis Zueb and with Katerina Sarikidou, they co-edited a book in which I wrote a chapter, and I think some more people around contributed to this book. And Cosmin, if you could introduce that, please.
Hello, everyone. Nice seeing you all, and nice seeing my co-editors of the book as well that I haven't seen in a while, Katerina, and I think Dennis should be here somewhere. He's trying to reach out. Yes, I think there's no better way to express our gratitude, my personal gratitude, to the existence of the Cycling Society Research Group and this conference as such, because it really was the impetus for us to produce this book. And it happened after a conference that took place quite a while ago, actually in 2016, when during my doctoral research at Lancaster University, I was kind of asked by Dave Horton, who's one of the co-founders of the research group together with Peter and Justin, if I'm correct, to organize an event, which is a Cycling and Society symposium at Lancaster, to kind of do what they have done in 2006 when the first edition was organized. So out of that exciting conference that we organized at Lancaster came this idea of a book that took quite a while to put together, actually, but we can gladly say that half of those contributions to that book actually came out of that conference, and there's 8 contributors at least that have been contributing to the conference and then to the book itself. So I think that's all I can say in terms of introduction. I'll give the floor to my colleagues Katerina and Dennis to tell you a bit more about the contents of the book itself.
Okay, thank you, Cosmin. I'll continue with the roundtable and then I'll give you all the floor for a few minutes afterwards. Because we also have here Claire Stokes, who will provide the local view on this little symposium that we've had. Claire is in Walkrite, Greater Manchester. And Claire, if you could introduce yourself briefly.
Hi, Esther, and hello, everyone. And yeah, I've enjoyed catching up on the presentations today on your excellent page, curating them all, and also managed to join the last 2 sessions as well. So that was great. So yeah, my background is I live in Manchester. I'm actually from London originally. I've lived here for 10 years, and I'm now a campaigner. My background's I'm a journalist. I worked for the BBC for a long time, but I'm now a full-on environmental campaigner, and I helped set up a group called Walk Ride Greater Manchester. So we're an advocacy group for walking and cycling, and indeed all forms of sustainable travel, whether that's the train or skateboarding, however you want to go that's not in a private fossil fuel car. And I also, during COVID, set up a cargo bike scheme in the neighbourhood where I live, and that's been really interesting too, learning about how it's a different form of campaigning in a way, you know, actually doing something, and the positive way that's received. You know, a lot of what campaigners do is kind of tell, and it's amazing how if you start doing stuff that that opens doors to conversations with people that you just wouldn't be able to have as just a campaigner. So particularly with, say, businesses around moving away from using vans to deliver and moving towards cargo bikes has enabled really positive conversation. So yeah, I'm aiming to give just a bit of perspective on what I've seen and heard, and my thoughts as a campaigner on perhaps where, you know, the research, great research minds that you've all got, where you might want to go next, which you can take or leave.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Claire, for joining us. And we will be looking forward to hearing more from you after we do these book presentations. And together with Claire, we will have Nick from the local organizers sharing the notes that the local organizers have been producing along the symposium. And yeah, these will be the conclusions of the symposium, and then we might have closing remarks at the end by Graham. So next is the book presentation. So you now have a little bit more time to discuss what's in your books, and I will be also popping the links to the books in the chat. So following the order that we started, Peter, if you want to go first, you have 5 minutes each.
Okay. Well, the politics of cycling infrastructure came out. It was inspired by Till. Till's the person responsible, because we'd organized a few. I'd organized some sessions at a conference in somewhere in Denmark. I forget when, where now. And we were just talking through the way that a lot of our talk about infrastructure was, there was all the technical side, there's all the technocratic side, but there are the issues around the fact that infrastructure itself, and as with any intervention in public space, is a political act. It's telling people what they should do, how they should do it, whether what they're doing at the moment is approved or approvable, or whether it's disapproved. So we kind of thought, well, why not look at some of the ways that the infrastructure has been contested? Good news stories, bad news stories, stories of contestation, stories of ways that different elements might not quite make sense. So we asked a number of people. We knew of a few studies that had already been done, and another couple that were kind of in the wings, as it were. And so there is a wide range of perspectives, mainly from Europe, but we also go to South Africa and to South America as well. And so to bring in perspectives on how infrastructure shapes lives, is shaped by lives, and some of those that it's not just about now as well. There are historical perspectives from the 1970s, and Njogu Morgan's piece, which is fantastic, that charts the history of one road in Johannesburg and the way that it actually is shaped around, and the infrastructure reflects the changing face of apartheid. So our intention was to kind of think about cycling infrastructure not as a practical exercise, but what are the politics of its implementation and of its non-implementation. How do we get there, and what happens when we actually put it in place? There's a wide range of chapters. I think that's it.
Great, thank you so much, Peter. And I've just pop in the link to the book, and people have discounts if they want to have a look. So I would now like Justin to do the same with his book.
Thanks, Esther. Thanks, Pete. Okay, so yeah, I'm just going to introduce the book Understanding Urban Cycling. So the book is based upon different bits of research that I've kind of pulled together, updated, tried to think about a bit more coherently. Bits of research that I've done over the past sort of 10 to 15 years, mainly in a few particular locations, London and Shanghai and Taipei. Now, of course, that's a quite selective group of places to focus on. It's by no means representative of cycling at large. But what I wanted to do with that was try and take a step back and look at it from a political, look at cycling from a political economic perspective, in particular, looking at the ways in which cycling's been reintroduced in cities. And, arguably it could take many different forms, and, to some extent it does, except that some are more officially approved of than others. So my argument really is that the dominant forms that we see tend to be those that serve sort of business as usual. They enable the maintenance of production and consumption, high levels of mobility, high levels of growth and affluence. And examples that I use in the book include looking at cycle superhighways in London. I look at retail-led sort of development on London's South Bank as well. I look at place marketing in Taipei, and I look at the extraction of sort of data from users for new markets through public bike share in Shanghai, through the likes of Mobike and Ofo. And one of the things I kind of conclude is that if this is the end goal for what cycling looks like in cities, I don't think it's sustainable. It's propping up growth rather than actually questioning it. So I suggest that no level of cycling, if it looks like that, is going to enable the kind of IPAC calculation, impact equals population times affluence times technology. It's not going to, enable that calculation to come good if the goal is the growth and maintenance of affluence. It's the idea, it sort of represents the idea that you can have it all, you just need to do it slightly differently. You just need to get on your bike a bit more. So where does that leave cycling? Where does such a negative take on what should be apple pie leave us? And Marco de Bromostro quite likes the book, actually, but he describes it as dark, which, I would probably agree, to the extent. There's a certain sense that I'd like to be proved wrong as well. I'd like to think that what we were doing was going to get us there. I just think so far I'm not convinced. And so but where does that leave cycling? I don't have all the answers, but I'm fairly sure that what we've got isn't the answer. So I think what I would say firstly is that what we've got is probably a necessary step on the way to something better. But I'd caution against seeing, things like high levels of commuter cycling in cities as, sustainable. I think the utility of cycling as well resides in its ability to question current spatial forms and patterns of consumption and production. I think its very limitations, actually, the idea that our perceptions of energy use when cycling are very high and very real, its inability to actually traverse long distances, its relatively slow speeds, its potential sociability. I think they're all things we should be celebrating and accommodating rather than trying to sort of downplay. And that might mean, for example, that we can start to question our very dispersed spatial forms. We might also highlight the sociality of cycling more by producing spaces for it that encourage slowness and side-by-side cycling rather than laying out, straight, flat cycle superhighways for mammal to, sort of get to work on. And we can question the distances, perhaps, across which our social relations are increasingly spread. And perhaps, we could question the amount of stuff that we require to engage in social practices. I'm not specifically going to pick on kite surfers here, but I am going to pick on kite surfers, even though I'd quite like to be a kite surfer. Maybe there'd be a few less kite surfers if you had to travel to the coast on a bike with a board and 4 different kites every time you did it. Whereas that's quite easy with a car. A lot of social practices are enabled with a car that wouldn't be with a bike. So maybe, we start to question what we're doing. So yeah, I don't know where I am in terms of time, probably over 5 minutes. I'm not sure, Esther. But yeah, so in terms of where I'd maybe like research to go, I mean, I'm at the moment dreaming up a project to look at things like communes and look at people with very different, sort of alternative lifestyles, and maybe what their mobility looks like, and maybe how cycling fits in with them, and the extent to which it has enabled or can enable a questioning of social practice. But ultimately, I think it comes down, if we have to do less, as it were, and maybe see a few less people over shorter distances, how do you mainstream that? How do you sell doing less as good? Because I think, ultimately that's where we're going, but cycling kind of caught up with that. Anyway, I will leave that there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justin. Very aligned, I would say, with what we've been discussing in the symposium, and also very thought-provoking, both of your books, I think. And to me, as an early career researcher, my learning from you both would be keep being critical. Just don't stop being critical. Don't stop, putting all under questioning, everything under questioning. So thanks for that. And now we move on to a different kind of book. This book was a contribution of many authors. And as Cosmin was saying before, it actually comes from a Cycling and Society symposium. And yeah, so up to you, Dennis, Katerina, and Cosmin.
Hello.
Hello, Dennis. Welcome.
Hi, hello, everyone. I think there is some problem with my Zoom and I cannot turn on my video. Actually, thank you very much for giving us this time to talk. And because you can see Cosmin with his video, he would like to make a short introduction. Then I will just continue with a few details.
Okay, Dennis. Actually, I have done a presentation, a short introduction. You were not here, kind of discussing how this idea of the book came. And
okay, so you've done this already.
Yeah,
okay.
You can go ahead with the contents actually, because I have made the introduction with regards to how we put this thing together.
I also cannot share the screen because I wanted to show at least the book or the flyer. Basically, I think this was a great idea, and although many presentations were later materialized in the book, I think thanks to Cosmin, Katerina, and myself, actually, we tried to make the scope much more geographic. So it's basically covering all the continents except Antarctica, and I think this is the true unique feature of the book, and it's actually very easy to read. Most importantly, it's also in a soft cover, so the price is relatively reasonable. It's £29, and if you have a discount, you can also have a discount of 20%. This is the discount code FLY21. And we are actually going for a more extended book launch on the 8th of November at 5 o'clock GMT. I think we will circulate this information. And we are happy also that Esther and Marco will be discussant for this book. Marco has already provided a review, and I think this will be great to discuss a little bit in more detail. Thank you again. I think it would be great if Katerina could also maybe say a few words. I just thank everybody who participated in this book. I think it was quite a good experience with Routledge. I'm also proud of the photograph cover that we managed to get on the paper soft cover, but it's different from the hardcover. So actually the visual preface that we wrote, it doesn't really fit into the hardcover copy, but we were sure that these only go to the libraries. So if you get the soft cover, it should be fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Katerina, are you around?
Yes, I am. Hi. Hi.
Hello, Katerina.
Hi. Very nice to see you all, and thank you very much for having us. So it's been a pleasure working with Cosmin and Dennis on this book. It's been actually, we as a team always had our challenges and working together and pulling it all together. But it's been great meeting and getting to know cycling researchers through this book and through the work they have been doing. So yeah, like Dennis said, it's really great that we had contributions from academics, but also non-academics in this book. So we wanted to combine different pieces of writing, attending to different voices. And the type of plurality here in the book is also in the title. So, we try to play with us being hosted or, being supported by Cycling and Society, by pluralizing the way that, this book has been introducing it there, talking about cycling societies in plural, and what do we learn and understand by thinking about all the, the diversity that exists within there, the different voices that can be heard. So the book covers 3 different themes, innovations, inequalities, and governance. And this is the photo that we have also been well debating between us to choose. And what is really interesting here is, thinking in the sort of how these 3 different elements, layers, are co-constitutive. So how we can't really think about innovations, for example, without even thinking about the ways that particular inequalities might be embedded in them, or how we, what is the role of governance in addressing, and thinking about the different types of innovations that exist, but also how to overcome some of the challenges and inequalities there. It's really great that we had some excellent gender social scientists working on the book, bringing into, elements of gender into understanding questions and unpacking questions of social justice and equity within the book. So yeah, I haven't really prepared a talk, to be honest, so I'm just talking through whatever, my experiences of it. And it's great to be amongst you guys, because actually there are some excellent, you're all excellent researchers working on cycling. And so thank you very much.
Thank you, Katerina, and beautiful project. And thank you also because I was directly contributing to that, and specifically with Dennis, who I think helped me a lot with that. So yeah, thank you so much. Looking forward to that presentation. Cycling and Society Support Committee, we will be disseminating the call. So if you're not yet signed to our mailing list, please do to a JISC mailing list that we have, and we will pop it in the chat in a moment. But yeah, thanks so much. We've had these books. If it was in person, we would have them in our hands, but at least we have the links and the discounts. So hopefully people will have access to them in some form. And yeah, thanks so much. So the first part of this conclusion session is finished with this book presentations, and I'd like to move on to conclusions of the symposium. And first, I'd like to give the floor to Claire.
Okay, thanks, Esther.
Claire.
I haven't written a book. Damn. Well, maybe next year. That's given me a deadline.
To be honest, yeah. Claire, I wouldn't. It's not all it's cracked up.
So, yeah, I'm going to pose a few little thoughts, and you, as I said, you can take them or leave them. I'm not a researcher. I'm not in academia, so take this, whatever you find in this, take it. So this is called Cycling and Society. So I'm going to make an assumption that we're all here because we think that cycling benefits society. And my theory that I'm going to posit to you is that basically we are at a defining time in human society. As the UN said in its report the other week, we're at code red for humanity in terms of the climate crisis. And so my kind of posit to you is that for us to tackle that emergency, and at the same time, you know, the physical and mental health crisis that we know we've got, we need cycling to become a mainstream mode of transport in every European country, maybe every country in the world, in the next decade. And I'm just making that up as a thought starter, but that's where I think we are. That's what I think the truth of where we are in our evolution as a race is. And so in the UK, where are we on that? Well, 2%, I think, I saw in one of the presentations. So 2% is not mainstream, is it? So let's say we need to get to 10%. So why am I saying all this? I think it's because, for me, all research should now be focused on this overarching challenge in all the different guises that what that means for your individual specialisms. And I think what I've seen over the last year, and I've sat in any number of fantastic presentations about, you know, all the great evidence that we now have on active travel, the benefits. So I think we now know why this is the solution. You know, why it leads to better health, better air quality, solves our climate crisis. And I think we now know roughly what needs to happen. So, you know, we know that people need safe cycle lanes. We know active neighbourhoods work. We know that placemaking is needed beyond just that. Not that there's not a bit more needed, but in general, we know those things. It's the how that we are stuck on, right? It's how do we make those things happen? So for me, as a sort of recipient of a lot of research that I've seen over the last year, I would say we need less on the why and the what, and more on the how. And specifically on the how, for me, again, it's about the fact that I think we now broadly know that we can say that people need to feel safe, they need to have a bike, they need to feel that it's for them, they need somewhere to store it. And then there is the whole inclusion agenda, which we've had a whole specific session on this time around. And I've really enjoyed, I haven't got through all of those presentations yet, but I think there's some brilliant new material there in that debate. But so we know people need certain things, but for me, the real question is, why isn't this change happening faster? What is stopping it from happening faster? And so I think broadly, we got to a point where that's actually less about the stuff that you can touch and count and put in graphs, and it's more about the things that you can't touch necessarily, and it's about people, it's about human nature. And I think I'd perhaps break that down into kind of three things. It's about human responses to change. It's about political will, and the word politics was mentioned in the previous session, and we had a good discussion about it. And I really think we need more research about how to build political will, what makes it, what breaks it. And thirdly, culture change, and certainly culture change perhaps in some of the teams that are delivering this, who I don't think I know anything about them. So that's it. We're at this crucial junction in history, and what is the bicycle's role in delivering that? It's got to be key. So and I think the other thing is that a lot of the behavior change stuff that I see is focused on the kind of individual behavior change research. It's like, well, what does it take for this individual to feel that they can get from not feeling able to cycle to feeling able to cycle? And that research is needed, but ultimately where we are is, in Greater Manchester, we need 1 million more people not to drive every day. That's the kind of scale of change we're talking about here. So I think we need more research on behavior change at scale. So that could be things, you know, obviously some of those things have happened in history, and perhaps we can draw more from on that. So my plea is for more research specifically on these kinds of areas. I would love more individual case studies of where things are going well and where they're going badly. So I hear a lot about Paris. Why has Anne Hidalgo been able to put in hundreds of kilometers of bike lanes? What are the conditions of change that have existed for her? Birmingham are about to do what I think is the most ambitious city centre plan in the UK at the moment. They're introducing a circulation plan similar to Ghent. And what conditions are existing there? And if it works, why? And if it doesn't, why? And actually, that's a great project to track who's in there researching how that happens. And I think if it does succeed, it will be down to politics, communications, and geography. That's my assumption. Things that haven't worked. So in the last year, we've had all these schemes. We talked about them a bit in the last session. You know, in Greater Manchester, just last week, we've had an active neighbourhood trial pulled from Cheadle. Why was that pulled? Now, sometimes this stuff's a bit too raw to talk about at the time, but that's where researchers can come in and go back perhaps and have conversations that aren't possible in the heat of the moment. The government in the UK have just put out a call for 12 mini Hollands. That's like Waltham Forest times 11. And wouldn't it be great if those schemes, when they get signed off, could be tracked and the conditions for change shared? We've also got clean air zones coming in. I want to know more about, like, how do people react to them, what people feel. So that's kind of the micro, the case studies. And then at a macro level, I again would love more research on, like, what patterns exist. So of all the schemes that failed in the last year in the UK, what are the patterns? Are they all in Conservative wards? I don't think they are. Can we draw any conclusions? I haven't seen any research like that. And then sort of pulling it all together. So again, looking forward, I started to do this, but I'm not a researcher. You know, what if we took the 12 major cities in the UK? What are their? How could you compare their funding, their active travel plans, their private car modal share goals? Other factors, who's ahead, who's behind. We need more of this stuff in the UK to help lead this, as that's what campaigners like me need anyway. Perhaps I'm being selfish. And then quickly, five specific things that I just like to say we'd love more on. One is I've called them people whose names are used in vain, and they're often used by people in opposition to things that change, but also by supporters. And they are older people, disabled people, and people from ethnic minorities. And again, we have heard more about that this session. But children, I really think that kids, especially those under 12, like, we've heard a lot in this country this year about consultations and how people didn't want something, so it gets voted out. And yet, you know, if we actually asked children what they wanted, if those children were part of those consultations, you know, that wouldn't be the case, and we all know that. It would shame the adults, I think. So more stuff from a kid's perspective. The second one, I really enjoyed Till's presentation on power dynamics, and I think we just got to bring this more into the public for, you know, car dependency is built on a whole set of political and economic factors, and there's too much sort of victim blaming and kind of making people feel bad for not getting out of their car. So I think we need more research on that, or at least kind of centering research that already exists. Thirdly, more evidence of the benefits. And again, this cropped up in the active neighbourhood session. So more evidence that active neighbourhoods help businesses would be a key one for me. And making it more topical. So I'm more of a journalist, you're more of a researcher, but we've got to get this stuff out so that it can form part of the public debate. You know, we need that stuff to become headlines. We need it to be graphics. We need images we need the evidence to illustrate these stories. We are at a crucial time for humanity. Let's get the research into the media. Fourth key point, behaviour change at scale, as I said. And then the final point, and then I'll be quiet, is people delivering the change. So there are three types of people that I thought about here that I don't really hear anything about in terms of research. So high-vis engineers and traffic planners, transport planners. You know, in Greater Manchester, we've got 200, I think, people working just on the active travel side, not even the wider transport planning. This is a massive cultural change for them. How are they going through that? What is their experience? And then the contractors. You know, there's a scheme being built in my neighbourhood, and I've heard some of the contractors saying things like, oh, bloody hell, bikes are taking over. And so what does it feel like if you're a contractor and all of a sudden you're building cycle lanes all over the UK and putting up rhino barriers? Second group of people are counsellors. again, they can't often speak publicly in terms of media, but this is where research, I think, could come in. Becky Willis did some brilliant research on MPs and their desire to do much more for climate change, and they spoke to her anonymously about that. So maybe we could do something more with councillors talking about, because they are ultimately people who have to live with this in the UK. And then lastly, you know, perhaps business leaders as well, and specifically the bosses of car companies and fossil fuel companies. So that's my list, my shopping list. I hope that's interesting. Somewhere in there, there's something that's made you go, oh yeah. And then lastly, just the final point that Richard Nixon made in the last session was that failure is an accepted part of learning. So I'd love there to be more on why things failed, as well as where they're going well. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Claire. This is a research agenda and a call for responsibility for us researchers. And I'm assuming you have notes in front of you. So if you want to share us with the committee, we will be happy to disseminate with our, oh, can't hear you, but I can see your notes.
Sorry, technical fail. I'm happy to type them up. So
okay, that'll be lovely, because we can share it with the attendees afterwards. So that'll be great. I think it's a great summary. Made me think of the co-production aspect that has been arising all over the symposium as well. I think it's time for us researchers to get involved and a little bit dirty our hands out of academia, get into meetings, get into city councils, get into advocacy groups, you know, demonstrations. All of that is happening out there. Some of us have done certain amount of that, but maybe it's the time that we integrate that in our research. Yeah, so, and I particularly resonated with me also your call for more and better and more diverse evaluation tools and processes. I mean, many things to discuss from that, but yeah, really thanks for all these points. We will try to take them to our hearts and yeah, really great roadmap. So yeah, next I would like our colleagues from the local organizers, if Nick is around, to also provide some of the notes that we've been taken along the way in this symposium. Nick, are you?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, there you are.
I'm
Thank you.
here, and I've just been listening to Claire's talk, and amazing points really, and for us understanding what's really important to know as well. So I think some of that actually comes into the points we've kind of collected together. We've been kind of chucking things into a Google Doc, which we've been doing all week, and I've tried to put it in some kind of order, sensible order, but I am going to probably jump around a little bit, to be honest. So first of all, I'm going to get the first point out of the way on COVID, because that just came into most of the sessions, and in terms of what impact the disruptions had. Has it been a tipping point? Has it been a catalyst for change? Are we going to go back to pre-pandemic behaviors, or is the greater awareness that people have had about cycling, is that going to help to carry us through to something else? I think it's really important that we work out how we can ride that wave. The kind of the glass half empty is we're just going to go back to normal, and the glass half full is that we can do something with it and use it. So that's point number one. Point number two is that marginalization and power balances have come into across many of these sessions, and into many of the presentations, and they're sort of like the spaces that are involved for cycling, and those spaces should be ideally co-produced by citizens and co-produced by cyclists in order to better realize what is needed. And that moves in quite nicely into the next point, which is that balancing those shared spaces is something that we'll keep needing to revisit as well. So it's cycling, but it's also walking. And then we've also started to think about other things such as scooters and skateboards and cargo bikes and different shaped bikes as well. And just making sure that we're keeping an eye on things that are developing very fast in that respect. The next point again is how do we conduct? How do we make these decisions? How do we conduct inclusive decision making that actually takes account of people's experiences, takes account of people's viewpoints, but doesn't end up feeling like some kind of referendum? How do we do that in a way that people get their ideas and thoughts heard? The next one again, and it's one of those paradoxes, is that policy absolutely should be working for cycling. If you look at policies, the global policies, the national policies, the local policies, they're about health, they're about low carbon, they're about low air pollution. So they all work for cycling, but they're not being realized. And so we need to work out what's, how that's being blocked. And more research is definitely needed there. I'm just going to really quickly touch on the research that we did, and we're looking at it in a way that there's a landscape where the political landscape is all about these policies for the good, which cycling absolutely fits into every single box. But then there's a regime which is car dominated, and so therefore, what can we do to bring cycling in as the dominant regime? Okay, I'll stop talking about our research now. The other thing is the overlapping policies. How can they work together? How can people in transport-related authorities such as TFGM work with the other authorities to engage people effectively about cycling? And talking of engagement, how do we use the data? We talk about data all the time. How do we use that into tell meaningful stories, so that you can actually really connect with people when you're trying to communicate the research? So we can communicate the research with each other easily enough, but how can we do it in a way that can influence policymakers even better? And then the final kind of point is a potential research gap, and it's something that's coming to our list of notes. You may think about this one. There's still a lot to learn about people using bikes for working, rather than using their bike to get to work. And there's a precarity relating to some of these kind of professions and the demographics as well that are involved in those. So that's the points all put together. I don't know if the order was the right order. I just want to make a final point. I said at the start about the glass half full and the glass half empty. And just listening to all of the presentations, watching the presentations, listening to people speaking, at the moment I'm feeling quite glass half full. So here we go. And it's not alcohol.
Thank you so much, Nick. Yeah, that was very thorough. And thank you so much for condensing these very intense sessions, these 2 days into these highlights. I like the mention you did to telling stories, which is what we are all doing here and between us and to other people and to different stakeholders. And we also mentioned the importance of language also across the different sessions in the symposium. So I think those are very interesting points to bear in mind. And yeah, this is coming to a close. So I would like to give the floor to Graham, representing the local organizers team, for the closing remarks and some announcements. Graham.
Thank you.
Yours.
Can you see me? My thing hasn't appeared anyway. I assume you can see me.
Yes.
And you can hear me. Good. Yeah, well, thanks everyone. It's been a very valuable session to reflect on the last 2 days, which have also been valuable and fascinating. And it's great to see so many people here from so many different cities and countries and disciplines within the cycling research area. I hope we've managed to give you some sort of Greater Manchester experience, even if only in a virtual space. And there's so many things to think about. And I really take Claire's point on board, that how we as researchers can inform and contribute to change in politics and culture and changes in practice at scale. And I think it's fair to say I've not heard quite so much discussion about politics and power dynamics as I have at the previous Cycling Society Symposium, as I have at this one. So that may be a sign of how much we're engaging with those debates and those issues. So I'm feeling relatively glass half full, I think. Hope everyone else is. So gives us plenty to think about anyway until next year. Thanks to everyone for coming and making the symposium interesting and lively, to the Healthy Active Cities team, Nick, Luke, Harry and myself for being local organisers, Cycling Society Support Committee, Cosmin and Esther for being the support committee and being part of the organisation this year, all the panellists, our guests from TFGM, Arup, Dinosaur and Walk Ride GM, Claire, and everyone who attended our sessions and kept the conversations flowing with questions and observations. We've had 183 registrations and 118 people, I think, from looking at Zoom, 118 people have attended at least one session over the last 2 days. So that's really encouraging. And we'll be putting recordings and notes on the website early next week, let's say. Which brings me on to next year. Luke, I don't know if you've got a slide to be able to bring in. Thanks. So just a subtle message here from the committee. Cycling Society needs you. The symposium is run by volunteers each year, and we tend to pass from area and teams to different years. So we're very keen to hear from people who would be interested in running it next year and hosting at their university, and hopefully, you know, actually at their in their city and at their institution. I would say just my notes have disappeared now because of this giant image on the screen, but the committee, myself, Esther and Cosmin in particular, are very available and able to provide support and continuity with the symposium. So don't feel it like you're having to take on everything yourself if you put yourself forward to organise one. And there's a whole advisory board of previous organisers as well. So you know, you would be very supported. So the only other thing to say is join the mailing list, and I saw Esther put the link up, and we're having a social. Here we go. Here's the screen back. We're having a social at 4:30, which is just around the corner. Another online social, which will be about 45 minutes, I think, or however long we want to talk for, really. And we'll be doing some small breakout groups just to chat a bit. And for those who want to, there's the London Cycling Campaign webinar at 6 o'clock as well, if you want to keep going. I'm not sure if I should say anything else other than hopefully see you either in the social in a moment or next year.